Tonight on The Buzz, we are covering the news coming out of IBC, looking at live streaming from the middle of San Francisco Bay, and taking an in-depth look at storytelling. We start with Ron Vargas, Technical Director for the launch of the Ocean Cleanup System 1. This was a multi-camera live stream from the middle of San Francisco Bay. Tonight, he explains what they did and how it worked. Then we shift focus to storytelling. At the heart of every media project is a story, but what is a story? Norman Hollyn, editor and professor at the USC School of Cinematic Arts, talks with us about his process of crafting a story. Next, Tom Jennings has won both Emmy and Peabody Awards for his documentaries. As executive producer for 1895 Films, Tom shares his thoughts on what he looks for in a story and how he shapes a story for a documentary. Next, filmmaker Josh Apter writes stories about people. Tonight, he explains what makes a good story, his creative process, and what we can do to improve the stories we create. All this, plus James DeRuvo with our weekly doddleNEWS update. The Buzz starts now.
Since the dawn of digital filmmaking,
authoritative.
One show serves a worldwide network of media professionals.
Current.
uniting industry experts,
Production.
filmmakers,
Post-production.
and content creators around the planet.
Distribution.
From the media capital of the world in Los Angeles, California, the Digital Production Buzz goes live now.
Welcome to the Digital Production Buzz, the world's longest-running podcast for the creative content industry, covering media production, post-production, and marketing around the world. Hi, my name is Larry Jordan. After a slow summer, suddenly there is a lot happening. IBC opened this morning. Live View attempted a very complex live stream last weekend, and we have a fascinating discussion on storytelling with an emphasis on the independent filmmaker. With all the noise coming out of IBC this week, we decided to do some counter-programming for tonight's show and get back to the fundamentals of media, telling stories. This gives our team time to look at what the big news is at IBC and cover it in depth next week. So James has the highlights in just a minute, with many more details coming over the next couple of weeks. And, by the way, our guests on storytelling are just excellent, with some fascinating ideas to think about. Before we start, though, I want to invite you to subscribe to our free weekly show newsletter at digitalproductionbuzz.com. Every issue every week provides quick links to the different segments on the show, plus articles of interest to filmmakers. Best of all, it's free and comes out every Saturday. And now it's time for our doddleNEWS update with James DeRuvo. Hello, James.
Happy Thursday, Larry.
A wonderful Thursday to you, and happy first day of IBC. There is all kinds of cool stuff happening this week.
Yes, there's a lot going on.
And what's our lead story?
Apple introduced 3 new iPhones this week. The iPhone XS, the 6.1-inch iPhone XS Max, which is the dumbest iPhone name ever, and the budget-minded iPhone XR, which is essentially the iPhone XS, but with a LCD screen and a single camera. Other than that, they're basically all the same all the same phone. It's got a 6-core A12 Bionic processor, so it's a little faster. They say about 50% faster, ideally, but it's a little faster. A dual SIM support for the eSIM standard, and probably the best feature, a new 512 gigabyte size iPhone, which is really kind of cool.
Very cool indeed. All 3 of the new phones are exciting, but what's your thinking about using them for filmmaking?
Well, this is essentially a dot upgrade. You know, in the TikTok development cycle, there's the Tik, which is the great innovation, and the Talk, which is mostly software refinements. And this is really mostly refinements. And as far as filmmaking goes, all it amounted to was improved stereo audio recording through 4 microphones in video camera mode. While the trio of new phones are going to be faster, they're not really going to make you a better filmmaker. Biggest new feature, in my opinion, is that 512 gigabyte size. And that's not enough in my mind to upgrade.
Well, it depends on what version of the iPhone you've got, I think, too, doesn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you've got like an iPhone 5 or an iPhone 6, maybe even an iPhone 7, upgrading to the iPhone 10 as, your patience has been rewarded.
Okay. That's Apple.
I'm just not excited about them. They look pretty, but they're just not.
Well, I think a better way to look at it is the phones are designed to do lots of things. Their key focus is not filmmaking.
No, it's still photography. And let me tell you, the still photography features are gorgeous. They've got this new slider which enables you to adjust the depth of field. So it's very light field camera-like, so you can actually adjust the bokeh. And the iPhone XR actually has the portrait mode in it, even though it only uses a single camera. But really, until they bring bokeh to video, filmmaking-wise, I think we got the best we're going to get.
Okay. That's Apple. What other news do we have coming out of IBC?
Sigma has announced 3 new prime lenses to their Cine line. So that makes a total of 10 cinema lenses now that they've put out. The 28mm T 1.5 full frame, the 40mm T 1.5 full frame, and the 105 T 1.5 full frame. They're compatible with, obviously, full-frame image sensors and are specifically designed for shooting ultra-high-resolution projects from 6 to 8K.
Well, what's your opinion of Sigma lenses?
Well, I love Sigma lenses. When I was in college, I sold cameras and lenses to put my way through school. And Sigma was always a great, affordable option for those budding photographers on a budget because you got a lot of bang for your buck. 25 years later, that is still true, only now the bang is much bigger as the image quality of these new Cine lenses will rival even the highest performing cinema primes.
Okay, what else is happening at IBC?
Adobe is launching their fall Creative Cloud update. It offers new tools for animation, including leveraging machine learning for instantly animating using a webcam or reference artwork. You can actually take reference artwork and just animate it in Adobe Character Animator now. They also have immersive video tools for using Google VR's 180-degree camera, and they're launching Project Rush for video editing across all platforms, mobile or desktop.
What's your thought?
Well, there really isn't enough time here to talk about all the great features of Adobe's Fall Creative Cloud update. Suffice it to say that every year it becomes crystal clear that going to a monthly subscription was the best gift that Adobe ever gave for post-production workers because they can constantly refresh us with brand new tools and new features. And this time around, that live animation application through Adobe's Characterizer is downright exciting.
Cool. IBC is just opening its doors. What other stories are we following this week?
Well, other stories we're following, in addition to the iPhone, both macOS Mojave and iOS 12 will be shipping in about a week. But we agree with you, Larry, that it's a good idea to wait a few weeks for the bugs to shake out. Panasonic's full-frame 4K mirrorless camera could be the best yet, according to the rumor mill, which has been ironically extremely accurate lately. And Vimeo is getting into the royalty-free stock footage game. That's what we're working on. What's tonight's story about?
Tonight, we have a report on a Multicam stream live from the middle of San Francisco Bay. That conversation follows immediately after your report. Then we shift to a discussion on storytelling from both documentary and narrative fiction filmmakers.
That's what it's all about. It's all about the story. So I look forward to hearing what your guests have to say.
Fascinating set of interviews, and we're leading off with Norman Hollyn, who is always a great interview. James, for people that want more information about these and other stories, where can they go on the web?
All these stories, including some comprehensive IBC coverage, can be found at doddleNEWS.com.
And James DeRuvo is the editor-in-chief of DoddleNEWS and joins us every Thursday. We'll see you next week.
All right. Have a good weekend.
Ron Vargas is a freelance producer-director based in San Francisco. Last weekend, he collaborated on a major live streaming event with the Ocean Cleanup, LiveView, and Keycode Media, which involved pushing streaming technology to new limits. Hello, Ron. Welcome.
Hi, Larry. Great to be on your show.
I want to learn more about this Ocean Cleanup live stream. What was it?
The Ocean Cleanup is a project out of the Netherlands by Boyan Slat, who invented a device that's going to clean the garbage patch in the Pacific Ocean. What we had done was launched this system out to the Pacific Ocean, and we just streamed the launch from the Bay Bridge to the Golden Gate Bridge. And we used multiple live view packs to get our video signal to our new tech TriCaster. And it was a first for me with all the technology, and I'm delighted we pulled it off.
What was your role with the presentation? What did you do?
I was the technical director under Michael Van Meter. Michael was calling the shots, and I was operating the TriCaster. I was just inserting the live view packs into the TriCaster and bringing up graphics in lower thirds and pre-produced movies, and just trying to make it as smooth as possible.
Okay, well, the process of video switching, we pretty well understand, but the idea of working with the live view packs and where your cameras were located is a challenge, because they weren't located just on a tripod in a studio. Where did you put cameras, and how many did you use?
Yeah, that's the great question there, and that's why I was so excited to get on this event, because we had cameras on the boats in the Bay Area, as well as a drone flying over the boat. So they sent the video signal to these live view packs that were on the boats, and via the wireless signal, we received it in Alameda at a control tower. There were 2 servers for the 7 different cameras that received these signals, and each camera had their own backpack, if you will, that delivers the signal.
I assume the cameras were on battery power. Did you have to worry about how long the batteries were going to last?
Only in the drone. We had instructed the drone pilot down and change the batteries, but everything else worked well.
Were the cameras remote controlled, or were they just a lockdown shot?
They were operated by camera operators. There were a couple of static shots, but most of the cameras on the boats were operated.
How big a crew did you have?
I would say 50 people.
Wow.
And that's, producers, directors, camera operators, people, piloting boats, talent. There was probably about 50 people.
And who sponsored it?
Keycode Media and LiveView were huge contributors to this, donating gear and time. So it worked out well.
I've got a picture in my head of San Francisco Bay. Where did you put cameras?
The cameras in our control area might have been, I would say, 2 to 3 miles from the Bay Bridge to our station in Alameda, California. As the cameras went further out into the Pacific Ocean, that was a much longer distance.
What technical challenges did you run into?
We did pretty good, Larry. The only technical challenge on this gig was just establishing the signal flow prior to the event with minimal rehearsal time. There was lots of assets to call up during the show. So I was predominantly focused on, the signal more so than the build of the show. The technical challenges were minimal. The biggest technical challenge was the conversations back and forth between our station to the people being interviewed out on the boats. But it worked well.
Was all talent remote, or did you have a studio base as well?
There was someone in the studio, and there was Rachel Richardson out on in various locations throughout the stream. She started at a restaurant, and then she went to Treasure Island, and then she got herself on a boat and followed the unit out to the Golden Gate Bridge.
From a production point of view, a producing point of view, did you guys view this essentially as a live telecast, or did you have a different philosophy in terms of how you were producing this in mind?
Oh, no, it was a live telecast. We streamed to Facebook and YouTube simultaneously. We promoted the event as a live webcast, and we pulled it off as a live webcast.
If you were to look back on it, what would you change, if anything, to make it easier the next time?
Just a little more rehearsal time. We had one tech day to put it all together, and I had showed up the day before that tech day, but we could have used a little more rehearsal.
Were you working on prompter at any location?
Yeah, no, not at all. The hosts of the show were totally off the cuff. There was scripted. There was a script, but that was just used as guidelines.
If you were to give advice to somebody else thinking of doing this kind of a major remote live stream, aside from additional time for setup, what other advice would you give them?
My biggest point of being impressed was these Live U packs. It's LIVU. And the fact that it can stream without internet service provider as well as deliver the video signal to us was very impressive. So, that's the advice I would use. Use these packs and you won't be disappointed.
It sounds like, in spite of the fact you didn't have a whole lot of setup time, it sounds like it went smooth, and essentially it was just like any other live show, except you were dealing with very unusual cameras.
Yes, lots of moving parts. We were nervous about pulling it off, but we did. It was a great team, and we were even minimally staffed. We could have used a few more people on board, but we made it happen, and I'm so pleased. The America's Cup 2012 has been my favorite gig since I arrived in 2010, but that has since been bumped as the ocean cleanup is now number one, and America's Cup is second to that.
Ron, for people that want to hire you for their next gig, where can they go on the web to learn more about the work you're doing?
They can find me at ronvargas.com.
That's all one word, RONVARGAS, ronvargas.com. And Ron is a freelance producer-director based in San Francisco who worked recently on this live stream, Keycode Media, and Ocean Cleanup project. Ron, thanks for joining us today.
Larry, it's great to be on your show.
Here's another website I want to introduce you to, doddleNEWS.com. DoddleNEWS gives you a portal into the broadcast, video, and film industries. It's a leading online resource presenting news, reviews, and products for the film and video industry. DoddleNEWS also offers a resource guide and crew management platform specifically designed for production. These digital call sheets, along with their app, directory, and premium listings, provide in-depth organizational tools for busy production professionals. DoddleNEWS is a part of the Thalo Arts community, a worldwide community of artists, filmmakers, and storytellers. From photography to filmmaking, performing arts to fine arts, and everything in between, Thalo is filled with resources you need to succeed. Whether you want the latest industry news, need to network with other creative professionals, or require state-of-the-art online tools to manage your next project, there's only one place to go, doddleNEWS.com. Norman Hollyn is an editor, a writer, and full professor at the USC School of Cinematic Arts, where he is also the inaugural recipient of the Michael Kahn Endowed Chair in Editing. Norman and I also co-host the popular website, Two Real Guys. Hello, Norman. Welcome.
Hey, Larry. Been a while. How are you?
Well, I have to grin every time I talk about you being a chair. I think that is just the most hysterical thing, because I can't imagine you sitting down, actually. You have been everywhere.
I'm an editor. I sit even when I'm on planes.
Norman, tonight we want to focus on storytelling, which I know is one of your favorite things to talk about. So to get us started, how do you define a story?
Okay. So for me, a story is inextricably tied together with an audience. So you have some things that you want the audience to understand about any subject that you happen to be talking about. So it's a series of shots or sounds or music or whatever you want to do that you want to have an effect on that audience.
So you can't have a story without an audience? Is that what you're saying?
I believe that's true. Sometimes the audience is only yourself, so you can have an audience of one. Most of us like to have an audience of slightly more than one. maybe much, much more than one. We're not writers, individually writers, just creating work for ourselves. Most of the people I know are trying to create work for as many people as they can convince to listen or watch or experience it.
So your philosophy is like a tree falling in the forest. If no one hears it, then it isn't a story. But when somebody does hear it or view it, then it is a story.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what the it is if there's a empty, unpopulated forest. I don't know what that actually even means. But I do know that the people who I've spoken to who may be, lawyers or editorial boards of newspapers or filmmakers or whatever, they all are involved in conveying a story, conveying meaning, conveying emotions to a larger group of people, even if that group of people is only two. Conveying stories to an audience.
I'm going to talk about this in a few minutes with Tom Jennings, who's coming on after you. But one of the ideas,
looking forward to that.
It's a great interview. He did a fabulous job. But one of the ideas that I pitched to him is my now current definition of a story, which is that a story is a journey. It's a process that includes emotion and changes. Because what we're seeing is movement over time. Would you agree, disagree, or say that I'm barking up the wrong tree?
No, I absolutely agree. You've actually spent too much time with me, Larry. For me, it is about change. It is about contrast. It is something through time. Now, the time may be I'm looking at a photograph and I'm parts of the image, or a painting, or a piece of sculpture. But it's the audience who's exploring that in their time. I think that's 1,000,000% correct.
Can storytelling be taught, or is it a natural gift?
Well, I don't know. I teach storytelling at USC, so I'm hoping we can teach it. I think that if you're absolutely tone deaf to the way in which people receive story and what the needs are to help build audience involvement, then, yeah, I can't teach very much. But at least the people who have some sensitivity and ability to know that there's a difference between what a character may feel in a piece of cinema or documentary or corporate video, news or whatever, what they might feel at the beginning versus the middle versus after the middle versus the end. If they're aware of that, then, yeah, we can give tools to help them understand how to better tell their stories.
I think it's akin to dance. If you've got natural gifts in terms of being able to move without tripping over the lines on the floor, you can be taught to enhance it, but you have to have sort of like a base level of natural talent. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that there are some people who are tone deaf to story. And when I say tone deaf, what I'm really talking about is, once again, the audience perceiving the story, how the audience gets involved with your story, and they might be tone deaf to that. But I think there's lots and lots of people, way more people, who are better at storytelling than they actually give themselves credit for. In fact, if I could take a few seconds, the very first time that I taught in Jordan, the very first thing that I did there was I asked them all to come in with a story that maybe their parents had told them, or a story that happened to them the day before, just something. And then we shot them telling that story, and then it evolved from there. But they all had a way of telling stories, maybe different at different cultures, but they all understood story.
Well, that leads me to one of the key things that I want to talk with you about today. You've been traveling all over the world, teaching and lecturing, and I don't even want to have you give me a list because I get too depressed. But given that you've been immersed in all these different cultures, how does storytelling vary by culture?
That's a great question. I think that stories themselves are relatively consistent among different cultures. I don't think you can make a generalization about stories, but you can, I think, make some important distinctions about the storytelling process, how different cultures will tell stories differently. One of the strong awarenesses that I had after giving a week-long workshop in Estonia, and there were lots of Eastern Europeans who were there, is they have a very different sense of editorial pace, of what a camera can and cannot be doing than we here in the United States do, for instance, where we try and constantly keep the camera moving, even if it's just a little move all the way through, and cut more frequently, all of that. And that is cultural. But the content of the stories themselves are quite often the same. It's just how they absorb the story, well, how an audience absorbs the story, and therefore how the filmmakers can tell that story. That's where things become different in terms of the storytelling part of it, not the stories themselves.
For people who are surrounded with way too much information and are trying to get their story focused, what's a good process that we should follow to put a story together?
So I always ask myself when I'm editing something or tell students to look at that is, whose story is this? To kind of step back. Now, that may be harder to do in a documentary where the writing is evolving as you're shooting and editing, but still there's a core to it, and I imagine you and Tom will talk about this. But whose story is it? And then how does that person begin? Give me some adjectives for that. How does that person end? Give me some adjectives for that. What changes? What doesn't change? And then where do things change? So then you can shape that story, or how you tell the story, shape that character. So focusing in on the who first, and then the what that changes, and then the where. So keeping kind of laser focused on the people and the audience who will be looking at those people.
Well, the interesting thing about that is that that's both very granular and very broad. You could look at each scene with who is that scene about, as well as the entire film, and say, what is the film about? This can be used for breaking down a scene as well as analyzing the whole overarching story. True?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I don't know how to cut a movie. I don't even know how to cut a scene, but I know how to cut moments and have them build into a scene and have them build into the story. So on the most general level, I have to know what the overall story wants to be, even if it changes, but what that story wants to be in order to figure out what that scene wants to do to advance that story, and then figure out what the best shape for that scene is in order to tell the story of that scene, which will add up to the story of the whole movie, TV show, corporate video, whatever it is.
Norman, I knew as soon as we started talking about story that you would have opinions. And for people that want to keep track of your thoughts about stories and filmmaking in general, where can they go on the web?
I would follow me on Twitter, because who's not on Twitter, right? And my handle on that is @Schnittman.
That's SCHNITTMAN. And Norman Hollyn is a full professor at the USC School of Cinematic Arts. And as always, Norman, thanks for joining us. This has been fun.
It has been fun. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye. Tom Jennings is an Emmy and Peabody award-winning documentary filmmaker and journalist. He has written, produced, and directed more than 400 hours of programming for such networks as CBS, Discovery Channel, National Geographic, Smithsonian, and many more. Hello, Tom. Welcome.
Hi, Larry. Thanks for having me.
Tom, tonight we're looking at storytelling. What does the word story mean to you?
Well, that's an interesting question, because it means a lot of things. Story is the tale of a person or an event that, when told properly, is something an audience member cannot get enough of. It's an assembly of moments in time and people's reactions to those moments that are the kind of foundational material for how we all live our lives.
I've been wrestling with this question myself. The definition that I've come up with is a story really is a journey. Sometimes there's obstacles, sometimes we're learning something new, but it's a journey that involves emotion and change. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Oh, I would agree. We follow the motif as often as we can called the hero's journey. Whatever you're trying to do or say in a film, there has to be a path on which the plot and the characters travel. And so I think your definition is a good one in that without that kind of journey and without the exploration and without the change that happens, what is learned, what obstacles are overcome, without that, you don't have much to say. You need the journey, you need the changes, you need the obstacles faced and overcome or not overcome in order to connect with people on an emotional level. I think a story is an emotional journey that someone wants to key in on and stick with, to the bitter end.
When you're creating a documentary, when do you start thinking about the story versus researching the facts?
Well, a lot of what we do is we have to come up with the hook or the pitch. We have to sum up the story in a way that gets, in our case, a network executive or a financier interested in the story right away. Story for us is really the hook, the essence of what it is. When I say a hook, we're very careful to try and find the kind of things that either haven't been told or haven't been told a certain way. Research and story go hand in hand as far as we're concerned.
Tom, your career first began in newspaper journalism. Was that a useful background for creating documentaries? And if so, why?
Newspapers were a terrific proving ground to learn to tell stories quickly and efficiently. The reason is the presses roll every night at 11 o'clock, and your story better be done and in and edited and ready to go, or there's going to be a big hole on page one. So there's nothing like pressure to get the story told. And doing that, you boil it down to the basics and from journalism 101, who, what, where, when, why, and how. In a sense, that is the essence of of any good story, covers all of those things. Journalism was terrific for that, especially daily journalism, because it did teach you to think on your feet, to get to the heart of the matter as quickly as possible and be ready to explain it to a wide audience.
I'm convinced that if it wasn't for deadlines, no creative work would exist.
Oh, I agree. I don't get anything done until the 11th hour. I think about the deadline coming, but I also am processing. It might be a little unfair to myself to say that I don't do anything until the 11th hour. I'm kind of like noodling things. I'm trying to figure things out. Like, what if I did it like this? Or what if we told it like this? Or maybe there's another person we can talk to who gives a different perspective that we haven't looked at before. But then, you reach a point where you just have to do it. I mean, otherwise you're just making films for yourself. So deadlines are the great kerosene on the fuel of creativity, I would say.
Unlike a scripted program, documentaries evolve as you learn more with each interview. Can you really plan your story in advance?
All of our shows and films are, they start out with outlines. We have a general idea. We talk about research. And so, we do the research of what we think is there. Then when we go out, and invariably the story changes, I would say partly maybe 25, 30% from research where we'll find something new about a particular topic, but mostly it'll be in interviewing people. They'll just say, oh, and by the way, did you know? And that all of a sudden enhances the story that we're telling in a way that no one expected. And we have to then go out and pursue this point, this new vein of material that's just come up. And it always broadens. So we try and start with a very tight, focused outline based on as much research as we can do before we head into the field. But I guarantee you almost everything we've done, all those hundreds of hours that we've done over the years, they've all changed, some radically, as the story literally unfolds. And that's one of the beautiful things about documentaries. You never know what you're going to get.
Do you view writing the story when you're doing the interviews, or do you see the story being written when you're doing editing?
Oh, definitely. It's in editing. It has to be. Doing the interviews with experts or people that have gone through certain events and having them tell us their story, you kind of guide the story, but it's a bit of a tightrope walk. You guide it, and you're trying to make sure you're getting enough information. You're not missing anything. If it's a particularly emotional story, you want to certainly draw out as much as you can from the person you're talking with without causing them great pain. But 100%, as far as I'm concerned, the beauty of what the story is happens in the editing.
Well, when you're editing your doc, how do you balance emotional moments with storytelling? Because the two are not necessarily the same.
That's true. Believe it or not, we follow things like the hero's journey story motif that's been around for a couple thousand years. The ebb and flow of the story. It's almost like it becomes instinctual. It's like you have to, it's a battle between character and plot, emotion and just the facts. And so you have to push the plot, the facts of the story forward in explaining the information. But there has to be this underlying subtext that there are human beings involved, there's character involved, and then they naturally come out of the plot to express the emotions of the moment. It's like the color commentary of the story. People want that emotion. They want to feel these things that people felt at the time. You just get a sixth sense of, in watching it, it's like, am I letting go of the character for too long? Do I need to bring them back in because something is missing here?
Creating a documentary is a long process. As you know, some can take years.
Mm-hmm.
What keeps you involved and excited about creating yet another program?
I like to tell stories about people and events that the general audience thinks they already know, and then show them either through things that we find or people who can shed light on the story, show the audience that you really didn't know everything there was to know. There was so much more out there. I mean, we seem to specialize in doing iconic events. We've done things like the assassination of Martin Luther King and John Kennedy, and we did one that's on Netflix right now about the Princess Diana. People think, well, how much more can you really say about this? And it turns out there's always something more to say. Sometimes I look at stories and I think there's just, or suggestions from a network for a story. I think, I have no clue how I'm going to tell that over again. One that we just had very briefly was 9/11. The Smithsonian Channel asked me to do 9/11. I said, in this style that we've perfected, where we have no narrator and no interviews, we only use media from the time. At first thinking everything's been done, but then I realized, well, what hasn't been done? What was going on in the rest of the country? We didn't use any media from the East Coast in our film. We only used media from places like Kansas City and Cleveland and even Anchorage, Alaska. And so the thought being, if I'm a news director in Kansas City, I'm going to send my crews out to the airports and military bases and wherever. And so the film it was called 9/11, The Heartland Tapes. And it was from everybody else's perspective in the country of what was happening in those communities as what was happening on the East Coast was unfolding, which was a story we all already knew, but no one thinks about what happened anywhere else. So that's an example of what gets me going, is figuring out a new way in, getting excited about it, and then even surprising myself. It's like, I had no idea this was going on. I had no idea these people were doing X, Y, and Z, and then being able to share that with an audience.
When considering that every project needs to have a story at its core, what advice do you have for filmmakers looking to find the best story in their subject?
Don't go with the status quo, meaning regardless of what the story is, there's going to be something that's been told either similar to it or even about it within that world of those 6 different ways of approaching a story from print journalism that I learned so long ago. There's always going to be a way to apply one of those to a new story that comes your way and go in at an angle that nobody has figured out before. And it may not be obvious right away. And sometimes it's not, I got to tell you, Larry, sometimes it's not obvious until you're actually editing the thing. And you think, oh God, I'm just retreading of what, 20 people have broken the same ground, doing, the same thing for how many years. And then suddenly something will catch your eye. Always be kind of looking out of your peripheral vision of storytelling for that one thing that's like off to the left or right that nobody's bothered to look at. And then all of a sudden, that's where the magic is. You find that moment, and then you grab onto it and realize this way is the new way in. And this is the path that we can forge that nobody's been on before. And that's where I tell people to look is, always be looking out of the corner of your eye for that moment or that person or that piece of information that gets left behind for whatever reason, and grab onto it, like a dog with a bone, and don't let go.
For people who want to keep track of the films that you and your team are creating, where can they go on the web?
www.1895films.com.
That website is all one word, 1895films, 1895films.com. Tom Jennings is the executive producer of 1895 Films. And Tom, thanks for joining us today.
Larry, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I want to introduce you to a new website, Thalo.com. Thalo is an artist community and networking site for creative people to connect, be inspired, and showcase their creativity. Thalo.com features content from around the world with a global perspective on all things creative. Thalo is the place for creative folks to learn, collaborate, market, and sell their works. Thalo is a part of Thalo Arts, a worldwide community of artists, filmmakers, and storytellers. From photography to filmmaking, performing arts to fine arts, and everything in between. Thalo is filled with the resources you need to succeed. Visit Thalo.com and discover how their community can help you connect, learn, and succeed. That's Thalo.com. Josh Apter is a practicing filmmaker and the founder of Manhattan Edit Workshop, a training company in New York City. Hello, Josh. Welcome back.
Hi, how you doing?
I am doing great. Tell us what you're doing these days.
I think it'd be easier to tell you what I'm not doing. Aside from being a filmmaker, I'm also, running Manhattan Edit Workshop. And a lot of my time is dedicated to a company called Padcaster, which basically provides a hardware and software ecosystem for people who want to shoot and live stream with mobile devices, which is a whole new universe for me.
Tonight, we're talking about storytelling, and a good definition of a story that I've heard is a story is someone who has a goal with something standing in the way. Would that define a story for you, or is a story something different?
I think that's a great start because, conflict is really, at the root of story, and something you want is separated from you with an obstacle and you can achieve that obstacle, then you've got Rocky, right? So I think there are also all kinds of different stories, though, in the sense that I just watched the Mr. Rogers documentary, and it was about more than just a goal. It was about a person or a way of life or a way of looking at life. And it was also incredibly interesting to me and as a story. So I think they come in all different shapes and sizes, but I certainly would not deny that, yes, the conflict resolution is the root of certainly most narrative stories.
So tell me about the kind of stories that you write.
Well, I'm writing short ones right now because with 2 companies and 3 kids, it's really hard to block off enough time to write anything longer than about 10 pages. But we're doing short comedy videos with a group called Cringe Factory. A couple of them went viral in the last couple of years, which was really nice, to basically poke fun at certain situations. They're satires. They're trying to push a little bit of the envelope in terms of taste sometimes, but it keeps us fresh and the muscle working out. And then I'm just writing, about longer stories. I'm in the note-taking phase on something that, would be considered feature length.
As you pointed out, storytelling also exists in editing. What's the role of editing to storytelling?
It's obviously a massive contribution to the process. It's really the last phase of writing. They say it's like the third birth of the film, but you're writing the film in a sense. Certainly in nonfiction, the editor is really charged with creating that story out of the footage. You're writing with images, and in some cases, an editor will share directing credit because the contribution that they make to the film is that of a writer and a director. There's a transcript certainly or a guide, but there's no screenplay for that. There's no direction for it, and you get in there and sit down in front of your 500 hours of footage, and you don't necessarily know what you have. So I think that's as an editor / writer, that's a massive contribution. But also, even in narrative editing, so many ways that you can take a script that is incredible and then shape performance or balance a sequence of scenes so that something that maybe is slow 30 minutes in is really a symptom of something that happened that was dragging it down 10 minutes prior to, but understanding the modulation and writing rhythm, really bringing that story out. That, to me, is writing. I mean, that's really it's just not writing with a pen or a keyboard.
What kinds of stories do you like to write?
I tend to gravitate towards, I'd say you'd call them human interest stories, just, stories about people, not crime stories or sci-fi or genre pictures or anything. It seems to me that when I'm writing people who they're damaged and they figure out a way to repair or at least begin to repair that damage, be optimistic but open-ended kind of ending where, they learn something about themselves but don't necessarily solve all their problems.
What's your process for creating a story?
I think it's something that goes into your head and then can't get out. I mean, that's really the way it starts for me. And, a story about people for whom their world is falling apart, but with the concept that there is a moment in everyone's life where everything seems possible. Something that I've been wrapping my head around for a long time, that the reality of life can be less than perfect, less than hopeful, less than optimistic, but there's some experience that people can turn to where they just felt like everything was open to them. Connecting that reality with the sort of day-to-day reality is that's something where I start, and then I say, okay, well, who can help me tell that story? What characters and what are they going through? And how do they get from A to B? And do we meet them at the beginning of that trajectory? Do they experience the hopeful thing, the optimistic thing at the beginning, and it all goes downhill, or is there somehow thrown out of structure? So I think about the core idea and then how you would structure a narrative around that with different people involved, and then I guess how to tell their stories, whether it's going to be one person or a number of people in the chronology. It's complex. I basically take it and stick it in a blender, hit puree, and hope a movie comes out at the end.
When you are creating a story, before you start writing, you've got a good idea. You know that it can be turned into a film because of your experience. What is it that's the trigger? Is it you see the end of the story, you see the big resolution at the end, or do you see the path the character's following, though you may not yet see the end, or do you have a great opening scene? What's the spark that suddenly gets the keyboard typing?
That's a great question, and I think it really depends on the project. There was something I was doing where I worked backwards from the end because I basically imagined the landing first, but then of course the whole story had to earn that landing or it wouldn't work. So that happens sometimes, and then sometimes you just come up with a really great title for a film, and then try to embody that with a story, or then, and I think I think more often than not I have a question like what is this about? Like, what is it about people that makes them do this? And I seek to answer that question, and the story comes out of that. It's just there's so many different ways that it comes to be, and I generally try not to have it so mapped out on paper because it's a great blueprint, but I don't follow it very strictly when I shoot. I never tell actors that every word on that script is gospel. It's a guide, and so I don't want to necessarily have all the answers when I start shooting because to me, if I can bring some sort of spontaneity to the process of filmmaking, which, as you know, is often a lot of waiting around and checking off boxes. The way I like to ideally make movies is to have it be an active process where things are actually fluid and changing while you're making the film. And it's a little unconventional, but you discover things. A lot of happy accidents happen. I mean, you definitely shoot yourself into corners sometimes, but I love the process of discovery that happens when you leave things a little loose.
Which is the opposite approach to, say, Neil Simon or Alfred Hitchcock, who've got every single word perfectly nailed in place before they start shooting frame one.
I was a disciple of Hitchcock when I was in college and film school, and the idea of having a stopwatch and falling asleep during a take and then waking up and saying, it was 2 seconds too long, do it again. That's an approach for a certain kind of filmmaker and a certain kind of film, I think. But I started seeing other kinds of films that seemed a little bit more open and loose and experimental. And, I think I gravitated more toward that ultimately.
What advice would you have to someone who's starting out, trying to write scripts or write stories or make films? From a story point of view, what would your advice be?
Well, you're full of good questions today, Larry. It's hard to give advice because it's hard to know what to do half the time myself. But if it's not going to be interesting to you for a long time, you have to figure out a way to kind of internally suss that out, because it's going to take a long time. I've never written any feature-length scripts that took less than, at least 6-8 months for a draft. And then you're talking about rewriting. But I would say the best advice I ever got when I was writing at first was just write. Don't write well, just write. Get it out and get the word "the end" on the page. Don't keep going back and revising your first 20 pages every time you sit down at the computer, because you'll never get through it. If all you do is you're revising the thing that you already wrote before you continue on, just write and don't think about it. Keep going. And then the process of rewriting is really where a lot of the writing happens. And I found that to be incredibly helpful, just so that you can start to see it take shape. You write a really bad first draft, but that's the basis for a better second and third and fourth and fifth draft. And that was really helpful to me. And I suppose if I could pass that along, that's the advice I would give.
It's very easy to start writing a script. It's really difficult to finish it.
Mm-hmm.
What tools do you use to assist with organizing the stories that you're writing? Any software that you like?
I use Final Draft. I know there are a number of other options out there now, but I just, I started doing this when there was nothing except, setting tab stops in Word and trying to do it that clumsy way. And then when Final Draft came out, it sort of formatted everything for you. It was so easy. So that's what I use for structure. I have a book. I keep notes. I try to, be aware of things that I'm thinking about as they come up so that they can maybe fit in. But I don't outline too heavily because, again, I don't want this to be a process where I'm just checking off boxes. I want to be open to things that can develop and change. And, and again, it comes out being this really kind of wonky, out of balance draft, but, it's all in there because hopefully all the notes that you're taking end up somehow in there, even if they're not in the right place or they don't belong there and they get taken out. But a book and Final Draft, a lot of coffee, and dedication. I haven't written a screenplay in a while that was, a full-length screenplay, but I know the process of just saying, okay, I'm going to get up every morning at 4:00 so that I can have 3 hours before the kids are awake to write. Like, that's hard to do. But, I know people for whom that is their lifestyle and they have to kick it in. Other people, they take off for, a deserted island and they come back in a month with a draft.
Filmmaking is a hard business. What is it that gets you up with enthusiasm in the morning?
Well, it's a really hard slog. The original advice I was going to give to people was, get a job at an insurance agency, because if you don't have to do this, it's not worth it. It's too hard. It's really incredibly competitive. And you have to be at the right place at the right time, et cetera, et cetera. But, what gets me going is I think in stories. Something will happen to me and I frame it in how it would play out dramatically, visually. I see the world as almost like an edited piece of film. It's like, I can't get around that. And so that motivates me. And I think, that's what I think about, when I'm not doing work for the school or for Padcaster. But the good news is both of those jobs are in this field. So it kind of, instead of thinking about something completely different during the day, it still gives me an opportunity to think these things and simmer about them and come up with ideas that may be relevant to those other areas. I feel very lucky that I don't have to do something completely outside of filmmaking as a day job, and then I get to concern myself with it as for my living.
Josh, for people that want to give you the money to do your next feature or just keep track of what you're doing, where can they go on the web to learn more?
They can find me at either Manhattan Edit Workshop, which is mewshop, mewshop.com. I can also be found at padcaster.com. And some of the stuff that I've been doing in film, I do with a group of very funny people, and we call ourselves Cringe Factory. It's a little off color, but I don't think it's anything anyone can't stomach. Hopefully it'll give you a laugh. That's cringefactory.com as well.
That's 3 different websites. First is Mewshop, MEWSHOP, and Padcaster, both.com, and cringefactory.com. And Josh Apter is responsible for all of these. Josh, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I was just thinking, tonight's discussion on storytelling is especially timely for me. In my classes, my students and I are working to define what is a story and how stories apply to media projects that aren't feature films. In the past, I defined a story as something with a beginning, a middle, and an end. But while mostly true, that left out much of what makes stories interesting to us. Then I heard a story defined as someone who has a goal where someone else stands in the way. This aptly describes most action-adventure films, but leaves out stories that are not about conflict. Then, after talking with our guests tonight, I've come to a new definition that seems more inclusive to me. A story is about a journey of discovery or growth or conflict that is filled with emotion and change. In some stories, the object is the destination, Frodo and his ring, for example. In others, the story is the journey itself, the recent biography of Fred Rogers or any travel documentary. As humans, we're intrigued by change, touched by emotions, and fascinated by people who are not content to sit still. Each of us lives our own life's journey. The stories that we like to watch allow us to apply the journeys of others to our own lives. Just something I'm thinking about. I want to thank our guests this week, Norman Hollyn with the USC School of Cinematic Arts, Tom Jennings with 1895 Films, Josh Apter with Mewshop, Director Ron Vargas, and, as always, James DeRuvo with doddleNEWS.com. There's a lot of history in our industry, and it's all posted to our website at digitalproductionbuzz.com. Here you'll find thousands of interviews, all online and all available to you today. And remember to sign up for our free weekly show newsletter that comes out every Saturday morning. Talk with us on Twitter at DPBuzz and Facebook at digitalproductionbuzz.com. Our theme music is composed by Nathan Doogie Turner, with additional music provided by smartsound.com. Our producer is Debbie Price. My name is Larry Jordan, and thanks for listening to the Digital Production Buzz. The Digital Production Buzz is copyright 2018 by Thalo LLC.